We are happy to have with us on stage Minister of Power and Minister of New and Renewable Energy, Mr. RK Singh. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
It's a real pleasure.
मेरा सबसे पहला सवाल ये है और मैं शुरू ही इससे करना चाहता हूँ. G20 को लेकर के हमने देखा है कि it is a matter of great pride for India to host the G20. तमाम जगह इसके हमने पोस्टर देखे हैं, घर घर तक ये बात चली गई है कि G20 की समिट भारत में हो रही है. It's a matter of great pride for everyone, for the fact that we are playing host to so many countries. But sir, एक आम आदमी के लिए जो ये पोस्टर देख रहा है, जो ये सारी चीज़ें देख रहा है, इतना बड़ा समिट हो रही है, इस समिट के अंत में जब बड़े बड़े लोग चले जाएंगे, इस समिट से उसके लिए संदेश क्या होगा?
G20 समिट में जैसे कि अन्य मल्टीलैटरल फोरम में होता है, कॉन्फ्रेंस ऑफ पार्टीज इत्यादि में होता है, या G7 में होता है, वो देश और दुनिया के भविष्य की एक ट्रेजेक्टरी क्या हो, भविष्य के लिए रास्ता क्या हो, इस पर बातचीत होती है कि व्हाट शुड बी द पाथ विच द डिफरेंट कंट्रीज द वर्ल्ड शुड टेक looking at the challenges before it, and that determines actually that impacts everyday lives. जैसे कि मैं अपने क्षेत्र को ले लूं, ऊर्जा को, बिजली को, ऊर्जा को, तो ऊर्जा किस प्रकार का हो यह हर एक आदमी को इम्पैक्ट करता है. It impacts every person, because everybody uses energy. Everybody uses energy. Whether that energy comes from fossil fuels or non-fossil fuels is a question which has an impact on what your cost of electricity will be. That is a question on what it is going to have an impact on the availability of energy. So that is how vital these discussions are, either here or in the Conference of Parties under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So we discuss and debate the future of the world, what the world needs to do in the circumstances which are prevailing. Now the circumstances which are prevailing are, number one, that climate is under, you have climate change. The environment is in peril. This is something which is accepted all over the world. Now there are very few naysayers who say that global warming is a myth. There used to be a time when you had people saying that, people in high positions saying that global warming is a myth. No more. And the world feels that, you have to have an energy transition in order to meet that, in order to stop or delay global warming, or stop it. And that impacts everybody. वो सबको प्रभावित करता है कि हम किस तरह से एनर्जी बनाते हैं. अब जैसे मैं बता दूं, अगर आज आप कहेंगे कि फॉसिल फ्यूल बिल्कुल रुक जाए, तो 24 घंटे बिजली मिलने में कठिनाई होगी. इसलिए कि रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी दिन में है, जबकि सूरज है. When the sun shines, you can make solar. When the wind blows, and the sun shines only during the day, it doesn't shine at night. And when the wind does not blow, you don't have energy. So you need storage. Now storage is expensive. And the world has not addressed it. The developed world, I have a grouse with the developed world for that. They've been talking about how important it is to stop global warming and how important climate change is, but they did nothing about it. So storage is absolutely essential if you want round-the-clock renewable energy. And today the price of storage is, I had a bid of 1,000 megawatt hours. It was one of the largest bids in the world. And the price came to 10 rupees per kilowatt hour. Whereas my renewable energy cost is 2 rupees 60 paise per kilowatt hour. So you get 1 unit of energy for 2 rupees 60 paise. To store it for 1 hour, you need to pay 10 rupees. So the total cost comes to 12 rupees 60 paise. Now that's not viable. So you have to add volumes for storage. Now we are doing that. But if the developed world had started doing this when they had started talking about the climate, then today we would not have had such a situation. So actually, whatever we discuss has implications for the common man. It has implications for the rate of growth of the country. Because you can't have growth without energy. There won't be any industry without energy. Your ventilators, your lifts, nothing will run without electricity. And therefore, I mean, energy security is the most important thing. Now, I'll tell you one thing, that what we have done is that we have emerged as a country whose rate of transition is one of the fastest in the world. Our rate of renewable energy capacity addition is the fastest in the world, not one of, but is the fastest in the world. We have achieved our NDCs 9 years in advance. And all this while making sure that electricity is available for our growth. And I mean, and that growth is actually substantial. You have our country growing at 7.2%. My power demand grew at 6.7%. You know, the difference between the growth between 2021 and 21-22 was 6.7%. And the growth between 21-22 in demand, I'm saying, in the growth between from 21-22 to 22-23 was 6.3%. In 23-24, in the first quarter, the growth was 7.8%. In July, the growth was 9.7%. In August, the growth has been 21% in demand terms and 16.7% in energy terms. And that in a huge country whose total demand, and the peak demand is 234,000 megawatts. You have to add, I think, most of the countries of Europe to come to that. So but we are meeting it. You know, that peak demand of 234,000 megawatts, the shortage was only 236 megawatts out of 234,000 megawatts. So that's what we've done. We've grown, we made sure that our electricity supply is as required for our growth, and it will continue to be so because we are adding capacity, huge capacities. And we have at the same time emerged as the only country whose energy transition actions are commensurate with a sub-2-degree rise in global temperature. So as I was telling my friend here, I told my friend two things when I landed. So I am wearing a dress which I should have been wearing. So, but that was, that apart. So I told him this, that when I first joined in 2017, and it's almost 6 years now, then, you know, my interlocutors from the Western countries used to come and talk to me about how necessary it is to transition, things like that, and how India should be doing more. Now, no more. It just took me 2 years. And after that, now nobody sort of talks to me about that. They are mostly on the defensive because I tell them that, look, I've done this. What have you done? So we are in a different place.
I think that's, let's pick up from the point where you have left. Do you feel that it is slightly rich on the part of the developed world to expect a lot from leaders and countries in the global south to do more to address the issue of climate change, whereas even now as we speak, they are polluting more?
Absolutely. I'll tell you what. You see, just look at the figures. And that's why, you know, now people from the developed world become defensive when I start, when they come and meet me. Our per capita emissions are 2.19 tons per year. The world per capita emissions are 6.4 tons per year. That's per capita. So our per capita emissions are 1/3 of the global average. The per capita emissions of the developed world are 3 times to 4 times the global average. Now, what needs to be done? I mean, if you want to actually actually limit the global rise in temperature to 1.5 degrees or less, then the per capita consumption has to come down to 2.4 tons. We are very close to that. And the developed world has to reduce its per capita consumptions from, let's say, 18 tons or 20 tons down to 2.4. Now, that's what they have to do. But despite the fact that we are one of the lowest emitters in the world, as I said, we had pledged, what we pledged in COP21 in Paris, that by 2030 we'll have 40% of our capacity coming from non-fossil fuel sources. We achieved that in 2021, 9 years before the due date. Today, my capacity, non-fossil fuel capacity is 43% in capacity terms, 43%. And that's why in Glasgow, we upped our ambition and said that by 2030, we will have 50% of our capacity coming from non-fossil fuel sources. And believe you me, I mean, I'm very close, I'll be very close to achieving that, give a year or so. And by 2030, I will have 65% of my capacity coming from non-fossil fuel sources. Because I already have about 187,000 megawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity. I have about 88,000 megawatts under construction of renewable, non-fossil, 88,000 megawatts. That's, already 276,000 megawatts, 276 gigawatts. And I have about 50 gigawatts under various, the bids, etc. So I'll cross that target. 50%, I'll reach 65. Instead of 50%, I'll reach 65%. Emissions intensity we have reduced. We had pledged that by 2030, we'll reduce our emissions intensity by 33%, despite the fact that our emissions intensity, as I said, per capita emissions are one of the lowest in the world. And we achieved that in 2022, because we have some programs which the industry will tell you are the best in the world. Many countries came and copied our program, the program for industry, perform, achieve, trade, where we, lay down specific energy consumption reduction targets. And if you meet that, fine. If you don't meet that, you pay a penalty or you buy energy saving certificates. If you, overachieve, you get energy saving certificates. So that has resulted in a reduction of CO2 emissions by 105 million tons per annum. 105 million tons of CO2 reduction per annum. That's one program. The LED program has resulted in emissions reduction for almost about 103 million tons per annum. Our star rating program, 5-star, air conditioners, 5-star fridges, etc. Now that has resulted in emission reductions of almost 53 million tons per annum. So we have a program for construction, the commercial buildings, the Energy Conservation Building Code, which sets energy consumption standards for commercial buildings, large commercial buildings. And that is mandatory. We have a non-obligatory Eco-Niwas Samhita for residential buildings. We are going to make it mandatory. We are a world leader in energy transition, in climate action. We are a world leader. And at the same time, we are growing. Now, one more thing you must understand, and this is something which I tell the audience everywhere, because unless we know what we have done and what we are doing, we'll not know what the discourse is about, what the narrative is about. And believe you me, that the narrative being spread out by some NGOs in the developed world are totally misleading. And they don't tell you, talk about these figures. They'll, for example, tell you that, look, India is a huge country, therefore its total emissions are high. But that's besides the point. I mean, that is ridiculous. You don't decide about the emissions depending on the size of the country. A small island will be consuming huge quantities of energy per capita, yet its overall emissions will be less. You have to talk about it in per capita terms, like you talk about GDP. So the narrative, has to change. And unless until we know the facts, that narrative won't change. So that's why I say this, that we are in a good pace as far as energy transition and climate action is concerned. And that was one of the vital points for discussion in G20. And it will remain a vital point for discussion in all multilateral fora, because climate change is a challenge, which is looming. It's there, it's right in front of you. So it will be a vital point.
Mr. Singh, these figures that you have presented are impressive, no doubt. The fact that we are 9 years ahead of our own target and our own schedule that we promised to the world.
We promised, NDC, not our own. I said NDC.
Yeah. The promised, yes. I'm just quoting a report in the Reuters from the 6th of April, 2023, not doubting these numbers that you have presented, because you're the master of what you're learning. But according to this report, fossil fuel power output rose fastest in 3 decades. Emissions from power generation rose to 1.15 billion tons. Coal-fired power output was up 12.4%. Gas-fired output down 29%. Share of coal in overall power output was up to 73.1%. You can challenge these figures. I will take no blame for this because it's not my report. This is the Reuters. And it also says, if you allow me, that renewables output also rose by 21.7%, the share up to 11.8%. Do you feel that while you present impressive numbers, 73.1% coming from coal?
Now, let me tell you this. You see, this just shows the narrative which is being spread around. Now, if you have an economy which is growing at 7%, the electricity has to grow at 9%, 10%. I just gave you the growth figures. Now, if that grows at 9%, 10%, then the coal and the electricity from coal will also grow. My PLF has gone up to 70%. It used to be around 50%. It has to grow if I have to meet that demand. Of course it will grow. But the point is that our renewable energy capacity is growing faster. As I said, today we have almost 177,000 megawatts which are pure renewable. Solar, wind, hydro, biomass, etc. So that will grow. But the wind will, but the thermal will also grow. Now the thermal will grow because, as I said, the sun does not shine at night. The wind does not blow at times. So you have to rely on thermal unless the battery becomes cheaper. And we are talking about a country which is going to grow, keep growing, and it needs energy. And they are talking about countries which have reached almost the pinnacle of their growth. They are developed countries. So the paradigm has to shift, that narrative has to change. You must realize one thing. And some figures are wrong. For example, today, and his figures also don't add up, let me tell you. You have 73% coming from fossil, not coal. Okay. So the the correspondent who wrote that, he didn't
which is why I said,
he didn't know what he was talking about. So
I attributed.
So he didn't know what he was talking about. I mean, the Reuters correspondents can also be ignorant. See, you must get rid of this mentality, that if it is a Western-based source, so it must be sacrosanct.
I will place these figures in doubt.
Listen to me. And that whatever they say is sacrosanct. Forget it. That's not so. For example, I'll tell you. Actually, let me first answer this. So my total fossil fuel energy is 73%. But that's not only coal. That also includes gas. I have about 24,000 megawatts of gas-based capacity. And my non-fossil fuel energy is in the region, varies day to day depending on the wind, etc., or the sun, about 24%. So the electricity which you see, 24% of that is already renewable. Now tell me what? And 43% of my capacity, 43.5% of my capacity is already non-fossil. Now tell me what? I have increased my renewable energy capacity by 2.5 times in 9 years. Now tell me any country which has done that. And all these figures are there. So tell your Reuters chap to remove his dark box and look at the figures. And one more thing I'll tell you. I will meet the requirement of energy for my growth. Why? I have a right to grow. And till so long as battery storage is not viable, and it is not, as I said, I had one of the largest bids in the world, and tell me which other country has that, 1,000 megawatt hours, and another bid of 3,000 megawatt hours of pumped storage, which came to, and the lithium ion bid came to 10 rupees per kilowatt hour. The pumped storage came to about 5 rupees per kilowatt hour. Unless and until that goes down, I will have to rely on fossil fuels. And I'm talking about, and stop talking about coal, talk about fossil fuels. You see, that is the grouse I have with these developed countries. I mean, the hypocrisy is amazing. You see, they talk about coal. They don't talk about the fact that, you have gas, which is also fossil, that also gives out carbon dioxide in huge and copious quantities when you burn it. Right. They don't talk about shale, which gives out, carbon dioxide in copious quantities when you burn it. And the shale gives out carbon dioxide, which is equivalent to to coal. But they don't talk about that. So somehow or the other, they got in, smuggled in a line in COP26 in Glasgow about, the phasing down coal. Thereafter, I was not there, whichever meeting I attended, I said, don't talk about coal, talk about all fossil fuels. You phase down, I have coal, I burn coal. You have gas, you burn gas. You phase down fossil fuels, I agree to phase down fossil fuels. And right now, as I said, I have about 73%, 43% is from non-fossil, so I have about 57% capacity-wise coming from coal and gas. That will come down to 33% by 35% by 2030. So that's fast enough.
Let me ask you this question, Mr. Singh. You see, according to this PIB article on the 3rd of August 2022, it talks about the Panchamrit of India's climate action, right? This includes net zero by 2070, cumulative electric power capacity from non-fossil fuel sources, 40%. You have addressed some of these things. 50%, yes. Reduce emissions intensity of GDP by 33 to 35%. This was updated later. I'm just talking about that Panchamrit, the commitment, and then how we renewed it, which is also, I would say, a great example to set that you are not only meeting your targets, but setting yourself revised targets. Where do you find India on this Panchamrit that we had promised?
I told you. Number one, we are the only country which has met our NDCs way in advance. The NDCs you read out were actually what we pledged in COP21 in Paris. Now that we have already achieved. We had pledged that by 40%, we'll have 40% of our capacity coming from non-fossils by 2030. We achieved that in 2021. Today I have 43.5% coming from non-fossils. Tell me any other country which has achieved its NDCs so far in advance. Tell me any other country which has achieved all its NDCs. We had pledged that by 2030 we'll reduce our emissions intensity by 33%, despite having the lowest per capita emissions. Now Reuters doesn't talk about the per capita emissions, does it? It doesn't talk about the 5 SUVs in every home. It doesn't talk about it. So that's the hypocrisy. So this is the NDC which we already achieved well in advance. That's why we increased our ambition. We increased our targets by ourselves in Glasgow, in COP26. And so now 40% becomes 50% by 2030. And in fact, I'll get it well before that. Because as I said, I have 188 gigawatts installed, 88 gigawatts under installation, 276 gigawatts, 50 odd gigawatts under bid, etc., in different phases. That's the 320 odd already. My total capacity in 2030 will be about 770 gigawatts. 50% of that is 350 gigawatts.
Mr. Singh,
gigawatts. So as I said, I will not only achieve that before time, I'll go beyond it.
Which is why I'm very curious to ask you this question. The nationally determined
contribution. And tell me
contribution.
which developed country has done this. Name one. And name one developed country which has reduced its per capita emissions. Name one. There you are.
Which is why I want to ask you this question. The nationally determined contribution which we have revised ourselves, setting ourselves extremely ambitious targets and achieving them and revising them also, do you feel that there is a very strong chance that we will achieve our net zero emission ahead of 2070?
Absolutely. I have no doubt about that. But there are two things which you must know and understand. You see, as I said in the beginning, every developing country, and I'm talking about the global south, has a right to grow, right? The developed countries have reached a certain level of per capita incomes. We have a right to grow to that. Now, growth entails consumption and emissions. Now, I'll need to add millions of square feet, trillions of square feet of real estate. My housing will grow, my buildings will grow. That needs cement. That needs steel. Now, if I make steel, you have emissions. If I make cement, you have emissions. And therefore, unless and until CCUS, carbon capture and sequestration, becomes viable, that carbon dioxide will be there. And that's one of the wages of growth. You must know one more thing, that our population is about 17% of the world population. Our contribution to the legacy carbon dioxide load, which has caused this rise in temperature 0.89 degrees, is just 4%. That's where we are at. I mean, you won't have Reuters talking about this. You won't have that. And despite all this, as I said, we have emerged as a leader in energy transition. Despite the fact that our contribution to the legacy carbon dioxide load is, 1/4 of what our population is, less than 1/4 of what our population is. So we'll grow. We'll need more cement. We'll need more steel. We'll need more aluminum. Now, CCUS, and I've been asking questions to all my interlocutors who come from abroad that, okay, you're talking about net zero by 2045, 2050. one or two countries 2045, some countries 2050. How will you do it? I mean, unless you have storage which is viable, which is affordable, you don't have round-the-clock renewable energy. If you don't have round-the-clock renewable energy, then you can't sort of phase out fossil fuels because you need electricity at night, even for heating, lighting, whatsoever. So it's one of my interlocutors, minister in a large developed country, he said that no, we'll go nuclear. I said, how? I mean, that country has about 40% of its capacity coming from nuclear. I said, how much nuclear capacity will you add? Where will you store the waste? There's a question mark. There's a question mark. He talked about small modular reactors. Now, small modular reactors are only still under development, still under research. So, what's your path to net zero? CCUS, you don't have any commercial scale CCUS, even in your country, which is developed, which is a huge country. You just have pilot scale. I also have pilot scale CCUS. And even if you have CCUS, where do you sequester it? CCUS means carbon capture and sequestration. Where do you sequester it? So the answer was that we'll sequester it in the voids left by pumping out oil. So I said, what's the guarantee it won't leak back up? I mean, so these questions are there. So net zero has questions. Storage. Unless and until you have storage, you don't have round-the-clock renewable energy. If you don't have round-the-clock renewable energy, you don't have, you can't get to net zero. And storage is expensive. The lithium ion, I mean, the total capacity around the world would not exceed, I think, about 20 gigawatts or something like that. We are setting up, we had a PLI for battery storage. We are coming out with another PLI for battery storage. We are building capacities. The developed world did not do that. The 88%, 90% of the lithium processing is in one country, in China. The developed world talked about climate, but they did not add capacity. That's why we are where we are today. That's why the storage is not cheap. So these questions, they don't answer. They don't have answers for that. We are adding capacities. We'll continue adding capacities.
Would you want to raise these at the forum?
I do that. I do that. That's
all
the
time.
I do it all the time. So that's why they become very defensive when they come in front of.
Do they still like you? For being so straight.
My constituents like me. I won elections twice.
Good. That's good.
That's
I think that's
for
good.
me.
That's all that matters.
The people who need to vote for me, they vote for me. So fine. Yeah.
It's interesting. You mentioned a word called nuclear. Now, I just thought in 2000, that in the erstwhile UPA government, that government went big on betting on nuclear energy as perhaps the way to meet India's energy requirement. Where are we vis-a-vis, attaining these goals and using nuclear?
Yes. I mean, we want to expand nuclear, no doubt about that. My current nuclear capacity is about 4,700 odd megawatts.
You think it should increase?
Huh?
You think it should increase?
Absolutely. We want, we have nuclear capacities under planning stage and construction stage of about 15 gigawatts, 15,000 megawatts. We want to do more on this. But we have to keep that in mind, the safety aspects. So that is something. But we are nowhere near where the developed countries are. I mean, you have France, which has almost about 55% of its capacity of its energy coming from nuclear. As you have another large country in the United States, I think almost 40% of its capacity is coming from nuclear. So our nuclear is minuscule, and the rate of growth of capacity is also slow for many reasons. One, of course, was you have the NGOs kicking up a row as soon as you start constructing nuclear power plants. You had Kudankulam, etc. That huge row. I was Home Secretary then, so that huge row broke out. And I was curious to find out, who was financing this. Once I started investigations, the row died out, and you have the plant there. Similarly, you look at the developed world; they have exploited 89% of their hydro capacity. When we started adding to our hydro capacity, you had NGOs sort of demonstrating. And we went before the I carried out a survey. Not carried out a survey. I actually engaged an IIT to carry out a survey, independently, of the impact of hydro projects on environment. And the results, are totally different from what has been portrayed. That survey report I have released. In fact, I'll send that to you. The survey found that wherever hydro projects have been constructed, the incidence of landslides has decreased. It's not increased, it has decreased.
Now that's
It
that's,
found
that's
that
news.
yes,
Mr. Singh.
it found that the environment around that project improved. The water retention capacity, the flora, the fauna has improved.
No, Mr. Singh, many
You look at all
environmentalists
the-
will not agree with you because many
I mean,
environmentalists
it's a research.
feel-
I mean, it's
yeah.
not my data. And research by an IIT, and the figures are there for everyone to see, and we have released it openly. So let anybody, till now, nobody has come up with figures.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I think this report should be seen, reported on, and
Yeah, yeah.
perhaps, yeah,
Please.
that'll be great.
Yeah.
Now,
I'll send a copy if you
Sure,
want.
sure.
I mean, my
Ek-
Pawan is here somewhere.
Sure.
So send a copy.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll wait for Pawan ji to send it. In the meanwhile, एक सवाल मैं हिंदी में आपसे इसलिए पूछना चाहता हूँ क्योंकि गुजरात चुनाव के दौरान जब हम वहाँ गए तो वहाँ लोगों के घर में जो हो रहा था वो देख करके बड़ा बहुत इंटरेस्ट आया और वो इसलिए आया क्योंकि वहाँ पर लोग ये कह रहे थे कि हम बिजली सिर्फ ग्रिड से ले ही नहीं रहे हैं, एक ऐसा सिस्टम है यहाँ पर क्योंकि हमने अपनी एक सोलर पैनल लगाया हुआ है तो हम ग्रिड को कंट्रीब्यूट भी कर रहे हैं और वो प्लस और माइनस हो करके कभी कभार वो कहते हैं हमको पैसा आता है,
एकदम आता है।
पैसा देने बिजली का बिल देने के बजाय हमको बिजली की कंपनी पैसा देती है।
हाँ, एकदम
सो वी आर कंट्रीब्यूटिंग टू द ग्रिड।
एकदम आता है।
हाउ होपफुल आर यू कि ये मॉडल पूरे देश में लागू हो जाए क्योंकि हम दिन में तो कम से कम बहुत ही धूप रहती है, रोशनी रहती है।
नहीं, देखिए, हम आशाओं में विश्वास नहीं करते, हम तो बात विश्वास करते हैं करने में। हमने एक नियम बना दिया, नियम है, नियम यह है कि हमने उस नियम का नाम हमने रखा है राइट्स ऑफ प्रोस्यूमर्स, यानी कि कंज्यूमर होता है उपभोक्ता, प्रोस्यूमर होता है जो कि प्रोड्यूस भी करता है, बिजली पैदा भी करता है और कंज्यूम भी करता है, यानी कि अपने रूफ पर सोलर रूफटॉप लगाता है। उसका हमने एक नियम बना दिया है कि कोई भी व्यक्ति कह सकता है कि हमको अपने छत पर सोलर चाहिए और सोलर लगाने का उसको अधिकार है। डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कंपनी, जो वितरण कंपनी है, उसमें आपत्ति नहीं कर सकती है और आप लगाएं 3 किलोवाट तक जो भी उसका खर्च आएगा उसका 40% मैं दूँ, भारत सरकार देगी। हमने एक, पहले तो होता था कि हम राज्यों को कैपेसिटी देते थे और उनको कहते थे कि आप लगवाइए, उसके बाद वो तो हम करते ही हैं, उसके बाद फिर हमने एक पूरा वेबसाइट बना दिया। पूरे आप कहीं भी देश में कहीं भी हो, आप उस वेबसाइट पर जाएं, आप उसमें अपने घर का पता होता इंडिकेट कर दें उसको और आ जाएगा कि हमको सोलर लगाना है कितना किलोवाट का। इंसिडेंटली मैं बता दूं, 3 किलोवाट तक 40% हम देते हैं सब्सिडी, और 3 किलोवाट से लेकर के 10 किलोवाट तक 20% हम देते हैं। तो 40 उसमें प्रथम 3 किलोवाट के लिए 40% दे देंगे, अब बाकी 7 किलोवाट के लिए हम 20% देंगे। और ये नेट मीटरिंग होगा। नेट मीटरिंग का मतलब है 500 किलोवाट तक। नेट मीटरिंग का मतलब ये है कि अगर आपका कंजम्पशन है सपोज 200 यूनिट है तो आप 200 यूनिट वाले ब्रैकेट में हैं और आपके सोलर जो पैनल है उसने प्रोड्यूस किया ये करीब 150 यूनिट प्रोड्यूस किया, तो आपको पेमेंट करना होगा सिर्फ 50 यूनिट के लिए, और वो 50 यूनिट पेमेंट करना होगा वो लोअर रेट पर क्योंकि आप उस ब्रैकेट में आ जाएंगे, तो आपको बहुत सारा ये गेन होगा, बेनिफिट होगा। तो डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कंपनियां नहीं चाहती थी इसको, इसीलिए हमने नियम बना दिया। ये आपका अधिकार है, वेबसाइट है। एक तो ये स्टेट्स करती हैं, हमने टेंडर करने का स्टेट्स को कर दिया है, अब वो कर भी रही हैं, लेकिन वेबसाइट पर जाएं, अपना इंटीग्रेटर चुने कि हाँ साहब सो हमको फलाना कंपनी चाहिए इंटीग्रेटर, वो आकर करके सर्वे कर देगा और आपको बता देगा कितना किलोवाट लगेगा, आप ओके कर दीजिए, आकर के लगा देगा। और ये अपलोड आप कर दीजिए कि लग गया तो आपके अकाउंट में पैसा सब्सिडी का पैसा,
मतलब सिंह साहब ये कोई भी कर सकता है,
ये कोई भी कर सकता है। कोई बैंक अगर लोन नहीं देती है आपको तो हमको बताएं, क्योंकि सभी बैंकर्स को बैठा करके हमने उनको तैयार कराया है कि आप फंडिंग करेंगे, फाइनेंसिंग।
I think this is a great
कोई आपत्ति नहीं।
This is a great point on consumer awareness where you can actually not just consume power but be a producer of power also.
और ये हम होर्डिंग अब इंडिया में सब जगह लगाने वाले। वैसे तो सब जगह लगाने के लिए मैंने अपने मंत्रालय को कहा कम से कम 6 महीना पहले, तो अभी तक लग ही रहा है। मैं उसको फिर चेंज कर रहा हूं।
आपने अपने मंत्रालय की क्लास ले ली। Mr. RK Singh, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.